Okay, hello everyone. This is the first time that we do this exercise of this Hangout session, but I hope we will be fine and that you are there to listen to us. Anyway, we have a list of questions that some of you already gave us, so we will begin with those questions, but we welcome all your other questions live, so do not hesitate to use YouTube to send us new questions that you want us to answer to. As you can see, we should have been 4 people. Unfortunately, we are only 3 people. I hope Jacques Spelkens will be able to join us very soon. Anyway, I will propose my invited people to present themselves briefly, because you already know them through the videos that you watched during these 2 first modules of this MOOC on communicating CSR. Odile, begin by women first.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Odile Ledésert. I'm the HR director for Nestlé in Belgium. And like everybody in Nestlé, I'm very passionate about CSR, and I'm very happy to be here with you.
Thank you, Odile. Jan?
Yes, and as you can see, my name is Jan Noterdaeme, and I am the co-founder of an organization that is called CSR Europe. It's the wide network of practitioners from business, working also with a whole range of stakeholders and policymakers about corporate social responsibility, or CSR, as sometimes I call the common sense revolution. And I'm very happy to be with you today.
Okay, thank you. So we will begin with some of the questions that you proposed, and obviously, we should begin with the questions that are related to the definition of CSR. So some of you are concerned about the fact that there is no one common definition on which everybody agrees on. Some common elements in the different definitions that we discussed during this MOOC, but still you say, why is it so difficult to make one perfect definition to understand CSR? Jan, do you have an idea to answer to that question?
Well, I welcome very much that there is not that one size fits all definition, since corporate social responsibility and even responsibility as such is so much local, context driven. It's a very cultural element of people and of organizations. Now, of course, there is a trend towards more convergence and consistency in the understanding. We are a little bit less lost in translation, since there are a number of international interesting initiatives. Is it through the United Nations or the ISO 26000? That's the first dictionary about CSR. We understand each other on the key elements, from China to the US, through Europe, India, and other regions and countries. But from a European perspective, we have been taken in Europe 10 years to come to a common understanding of corporate social responsibility. And we is 10 years where enterprises, non-governmental organizations, trade unions, academics, investors, policymakers, have been for 10 years engaged in a European multi-stakeholder forum, and the result of it is the following. CSR is the business contribution to sustainable development. It is the responsibility of enterprises for their impact on society, the positive impact, the negative impact. If you go one step further, it is understood as the process, a process whereby enterprises integrate in their strategy and, of course, in their practice, environmental concerns, social concerns, human rights concerns, ethical concerns. And this, they do it, that integration, they do that together with the stakeholders, the internal stakeholders, the people and employees first within the company, and of course also a whole range of external stakeholders. And the purpose of that integration of all these concerns in practice and strategy of business has a twofold objective. One, it is to mitigate the negative impacts, to minimize the risks on society and environment, but it is also to maximize the opportunities through the innovation of products, of services, of business models, and this with a vision to create more shared value. And that is something which I believe also Nestlé can talk a lot about, since they have been taking the lead of this definition of shared value creation, which we believe is also the genetics, the DNA of corporate social responsibility.
Okay, so maybe Odile, you can complement this answer, talk about shared value.
Yes, well, thank you, Jan. This is a very good and very clear definition. It's true that in Nestlé we don't talk about CSR, we talk about creating shared value. One thing that is important is that this year Nestlé celebrates its 150th anniversary. And definitely there's a notion of Nestlé that time is a very important component of being a corporation, and that being sustainable, being there for the future, and being there for a very long time is very important to us. And if we want to have this notion of sustainable, durable presence in the market, we can do it only if we do it in a positive way for society, that we contribute to solving a number of social, environmental, etc. issues, so that we can sustain our development through time. And hence the notion of creating shared value. We believe that the CSR makes sense if it creates value for society, but also if it creates value for the communities in which we operate. And it's because it's shared that it is durable, because we are a corporation, we are a business, and we're here to make a profit. That's for sure. You know, nobody denies this. The notion is keeping this profit going on a long time, on the long term, and we can do this only if we do it by sharing some of the value that we create.
Okay, I think that in your answers you touch on other questions that have been asked about finally, is CSR philanthropic or business oriented? So in your answers you definitely said that you are a company, that you are there to do profits. So behind your CSV strategy, of course, there is this business orientation and willingness to do profits. But can you nuance maybe this, or discuss this idea of the motivation? Is it linked to philanthropy or business? Or both?
Philanthropy, no, definitely not. This is the way, for us, this is a way of doing business. It's really essential to understand this. It's not something that is added on. It's not a little plus that we put there because it looks good. It's a way of doing business. And to us, that's the only way it can be durable and it can make sense. And so we do it for the business, for the sustainability of the business, because there cannot be sustainability of the business if there's not sustainability of the communities and the society in which we operate. It's such common sense that, you know, it's essential. It's like breathing for us. It's very important, and it's not something that is outside of our normal way of operating.
So it's a way of doing business. Jan, do you want to complement these answers about the motivations of companies?
And it's a very welcome question. And I said that corporate responsibility is very cultural driven, context driven. And it is true that in a number of regions, maybe CSR is starting first through the gate of philanthropy, and then it expands across the functions of a company. In Europe, I think we almost don't make the confusion between CSR, or whatever term you use, and philanthropy. Although a lot of companies in Europe are very engaged at the community level, with also often some philanthropic activities, but even these philanthropic activities are now thought quite strategically. You don't have a collaboration between a business and Doctors Without Borders, which is a large organization, Médecins Sans Frontières, just by giving some donation. You work on how to make civil society organizations professional. You you exchange knowledge and intelligence and competences more than just philanthropic classic work. And the words that we use a lot with all the companies that we are working with and the stakeholders is, how do you revisit the functions of a company? So if you integrate human, social, environmental, ethical concerns, well, it is across all the functions and all the decision layers in a company. So we have a high expectation that people in charge of human resources are creative, innovative, engaging with stakeholders with regard, how do you manage active aging in a company? In a region like Europe that is having a demographic change that is extremely rapid, with an average age that in the next 10 years is going to boom from 38 towards 48. How do you manage intergenerational employees in a company with more active aging people that will have to work higher? How do you manage diversity? The gender, the ethnic backgrounds. Look at what is happening to a number of countries with the issue of asylum seekers and migrants. It's there to stay. How do you manage that from a company perspective, also within your supply chain? How do you revisit the function of a purchase director for a more sustainable supply chain? So it's really, how do you do some genetic modification within the organization, function by function? So that is where we see the real benefits of a CSR, with some very tangible benefits, but also with the medium and long term. Sometimes we call it soft impact, although we believe it's extremely hard.
Okay, so I think it's clear now that we know that CSR is the way of doing business, is related to how to revisit your functions, as you said, to do it more responsibly. And there is one connected and interesting question that have been asked about. Do you think that companies should only focus on social and environmental issues that are related to their area, to their core business, to their sectors of activities? Or do you think they have to help solve social issues in general? So what would be your perspective on this very interesting question? Because if we listen to your answers just now, it should be connected to the strategy, the core business, connected to what the company is doing and how the company is functioning. But what about big challenges of society that maybe are far from being connected to the company? Is it also the responsibility of business to touch those topics? Big question.
I think it's very open, but it's also a matter of efficiency. You need to keep very focused, of course, as a business, to be efficient and also to generate the return on investment. So if you would ask me, is it today the core business of a hospital to also take care about the whole cultural animation in the community where it's operating? You could say, why not? We see interesting collaborations between clowns and hospitals to animate young children that have a long stay in the hospitals, and that it is part of the caring and curing. So why not? So it's very open. What is really important is for an enterprise to define what is called the materiality of issues and see where, with their employees, I would call them sometimes their intrapreneurs from the company, with external stakeholders, they can come and define the priority issues and stick to a number of priorities, because if you have a 360-degree investment, then it's scratching the surface and the impact might be extremely low, and you don't have the case for your board to take strategic decisions about this multitude of initiatives. So stay focused, be at your best, and bring all your knowledge and capacities and competences into the projects that you will choose.
Would you agree with this perspective? Or
yes, and I would add to it, certainly focus is important to being efficient. So, I mean, if we try to be all over the place, we will lose efficiency. But I would go even further than that. If a CSR initiative of the company is not connected to its strategy, there's a very fair chance that the first time there's a crisis, money becomes scarce, you have to make some savings, the first thing that goes will be this initiative, because it's not essential to the business. Whereas if the creating shared value initiatives you work on are completely embedded in the key strategic focus of your business, it will have to stay because it's strategic. I give an example. One of our key CSV focus area is agricultural development. We are a company that transforms agricultural products, so it's essential that we secure a number of key raw materials that are for us coffee, milk, cocoa, some others also can be involved. But if we start having major issues in the supplying of coffee or cocoa, either because the price becomes too high because there are not enough farmers, or the price becomes too low and the farmers can't survive and the quality goes down, we have an issue and a major issue. So we need to focus on areas that will bring strategic results, and then it's durable, then it's sustainable. Otherwise, there's a fair chance that it's just philanthropy, and the philanthropy is the first thing that goes down the toilet when things would get tough.
Okay, thank you. So do not hesitate to ask your questions directly to us, if you want us to touch other topics or related topics to what we have discussed now. So I continue with your questions on the Hangout discussion forum. And I think about how to implement CSR. A lot of you ask questions about how to do it concretely. Who should be in charge of CSR? Is it necessary to have a CSR department? So maybe, Odile, you can explain us how CSR is structured in your organizational chart and why is it like that?
Okay. So basically we have a CSV. CSV, yes. CSV department, centrally located in our headquarters in Switzerland. And there, I don't know, there are about 30, 40 people working there. I'm not sure about the numbers, but it's a relatively small number compared to 330,000 employees in Nestlé in general. Then in the larger units operating in the different countries where we are, you can have one person who will have the responsibility of CSV and will be working on this on a full-time basis or almost full-time basis. In a market like Belgium, where we are small, there is not a CSV specialist. I mean, this is why you've got the HR manager here in front of you. It's just something that we manage as a company. All the Mancom is implied. Different people are working on it. As I said, it's part of the way we do business, so it has to be integrated in our daily job. And the role of those specialists is really to coordinate the efforts, to direct these efforts, but it's not to do the job of the different functions. I mean, Jan has mentioned it, it's part of the function. So you can't be a CSR, as a CSR specialist, you can't be a specialist of how to consume waters in factories, nutrition for babies and for elderly people, coffee, agriculture, etc. So it's really coordination. The people who do the work are the people who are, in charge of purchasing, in charge of technical, in charge of nutrition, etc., etc. So
does it mean it is something that is part of your evaluation in your different functions, that you are assessed also on the fact that you take into account, push further the CSV strategy in your function?
Well, first, when we assess people in our company, we always say that we assess on the what and then the how. The what is the results that we obtain, it's our growth, our market share, our profit, etc. The how is the type of behaviors we develop and how we achieve them. So on the how, we have one criteria. We have a number of criteria. One of them is called practice what you preach, and it's about being true to our commitments, about being true to our word, and about considering always the impact of our activities in terms of ethical impact. So definitely this is part of the evaluation process. And then also, I mean, let's say that we have this huge project that has been going on for quite a while on responsible sourcing. Well, definitely, the procurement managers and the procurement leaders will have probably in their objectives a number of activities that they need to deliver so that we can answer this particular topic.
Okay, Jan, do you want to add something about these questions? Or do you suggest to companies to have a CSR department? Or do you think it has some added value? Or is it better that it is more ingrained in the whole company? I think, say it like this, it's by definition you would say it's better that it is ingrained, but what would be the added value of a CSR department according to you? Or there is not?
Well, the way we have been seeing the creation of this new function in companies was interesting, because if you look at the men and women and first generations that have been taking up these functions in companies, I would call them as sometimes troubleshooters within the company. And very often they have a direct link to the CEO, or at least to a number of board members, and with a license to speak openly and to take the CEO and the board with a number of contradictions, which are totally normal in any organization. Is it private? Is it non-profit? Is it governmental? The schizophrenic attitude we have in our societies, including the consumers. You think as a citizen, but you continue to behave as a consumer to get the most for the less. So the CSR function is there to come and look, make it more clear what are some obvious contradictions within a company and the gap between the values of the company and the reality of how it is making business and doing business. So that's one very important function. In the Middle Ages, some of you might remember your history where kings were having their fool next to them, a little bit with a lot of colors, and they were the only ones to really have the license to say to the king really what they were feeling and sensing, etc. Now, another function that is critical is how a CSR team and manager is there in support to its colleagues to enhance their performance. By bringing to their colleagues new perceptions, new intelligence, new contextualization of things, and how their colleagues could engage maybe with some disruptive colleagues from other stakeholder organizations around the company and bring them at ease. It's also the CSR team that often is bringing colleagues that work in silos together. So that is something that we have seen through CSR teams bringing the production people of a company closer to the marketing and see, well, can we be a bit more consistent with regard to how we think the products, how we design the products, and how do we communicate, not through greenwashing marketing, but through engaging also consumers to take up their responsibility towards more responsible consumption. So that is another function we see. Of course, we say sometimes that it's like in the opera, CSR is there to die, but it takes a long time before it's fully mainstreamed or ingrained in all the functions and layers and value chain of the company.
Okay, thank you. I see that we have a question from Bas that is specifically for you, Jan, but I think we can all discuss this question to conclude on this part about CSR definition, I think. It's what do you think about organizations that use cause-related marketing? as part of their CSR efforts. And Lars compared those cases to organizations who embed CSR within their business model. So what do you think about that? Is it something worthwhile, even though maybe it's just one technique, I think, that is used to implement some concrete actions and not the full CSR strategy of the company that is based on cause-related marketing? What can you add to this?
As long as it is being done in a very smart and intelligent way, then go ahead, use the power of marketing and your access to a wide range of citizens to galvanize them around a cause you strongly believe in. But don't do it a quick fix. Be really consistent. Make sure that you secure your underpants before you put a jacket of cause-related marketing. Sometimes I say, make sure that you're consistent, otherwise it could be seen very, very rapidly by the consumers that this is just a trick. And fine. Now you might also say to companies, and I say that quite often, you have a license to make mistakes. Well, then you have to clean up the risk and the consequences of it. But CSR is also about creating solutions, and successful solutions are the number of failures plus one improvement. You have a license to try and to fail. We are not robots so far. So this is about man and human trying to co-elaborate solutions together and trying to see with stakeholders that maybe other opinions, other views, where it's still efficient for companies to engage and dare more about corporate social responsibility or shared value creation.
Thank you, Jan, for this. I think you touched another topic that is really important, and that was really important in the discussion forum this week, is the mistakes of companies, errors, problems, scandals, accusations of irresponsible acts. So what do you think? Sometimes people can consider that it's better not to say what you are doing in terms of your CSR activities, because as soon as you say you are investing in some causes, developing some CSR actions, you have the risk that someone will criticize you for what you are eating, what you are not doing, or you are not doing enough. So what would be your recommendation to companies? Is it a good idea to communicate about what they are doing? While we know that nobody is perfect, there are still problems, things to improve. So does it mean that we have to hide what we are doing to protect the company, or do we have to show off? What do you think? Maybe because of the recent discussion we had about the Nestlé case, you can maybe comment this question, Odile?
Well, actually, Nestlé has been through both attitudes. The milk, the powdered milk in Africa issue, which happened in the 1970s, has been a founding moment for Nestlé. It's been also a big trauma. It's something that we've had a lot of trouble finding our way out of. And I go to what Jan is saying, you can fail, and it's a lot of failures before we find a solution. But definitely with the milk powder issue 50 years ago in Africa, we have failed to start with, and we have tried to learn from our lessons. The first reactions in the last few decades was, let's keep a low profile. Okay, we've worked a lot with the WHO organization to try to solve these issues. We've tried to do our best, but then it was always, if we open our mouth, we will be suspected in any case of wrongdoing. So there's no point communicating. It can hurt us more than it helps us. This has changed in the last 10 years, and I think it's really changed when we hit on the concept of creating shared value, which Jan has mentioned in his introduction. And when we realize that, as I said, it's a way of doing business, it's creating value for society and for ourselves, and it makes a lot of business sense and a lot of society sense. And once we hit on this, we started realizing that we really had a lot of work that we were already doing. We could focus and become even more efficient in the way we were doing this work. We also, one of the big lessons was we can't be specialists of ethical, environmental, human rights issues. There are stakeholders, as you say, there are NGOs, there are institutions out there who know about this. And so our first focus was really engage with those stakeholders. And this remains the main focus of our communication. You will not see a Nestlé TV ad that says, what we do in terms of CSR, but you will find, on many forums everywhere that we are engaging, different organizations, that we're collaborating with them, that we're building solutions with them, and this is really the main focus of our communication. It's more do things right with the stakeholders, and hopefully things will then start to spread out. It's a long journey. I'm not saying we're not going to do mistakes again, and there might be other scandals, because as you said, mistakes happen. We are a human organization, but we're a human organization that is trying to do things the right way. And so in the end, we will always find solutions for the issues that we encounter.
Okay, yeah, you want to add something?
I take a word of Odile. Sense, giving sense. Now, sense, it can be, another word is meaning, but you have also sense, which is the feeling. And sometimes I have debates and where some managers or people in business feel a bit resistant or have sometimes some fears about how to be outspoken and transparent about what their company is doing or maybe not doing. And then it came to my mind that isn't it that corporate social responsibility behavior is very much about making your organization more erotic. And in the word erotic, you have two words. Ethic, that means make it meaningful, give it a purpose. And if you add these two letters of R and O, make it erotic, meaning make yourself attractive to your investors, to your employees. How many men and women today in their job are looking for more meaning, giving more sense to what they do when they wake up in the morning? And what is it that they tell in the evening to their children or to their partners, wives, or mothers or fathers, whatever? Where is it that you are shaping meaning through your job? So therefore, I think there is really a challenge for companies to find the right channel of communication and the right tools to communicate that their organization is willing to support that quest towards providing more meaning in our lives, even in the daily consumption actions or decisions that you take. What kind of mobility, what kind of food, what kind of whatever. How can you even find meaning in your daily life and in your patterns of consumption? And there the company has a key role to play.
Thank you, Jan. I think you, in your answer, you also answered directly to another question that have been asked, is about the benefits of developing CSR strategy. I think that in the last part of what you said, you mentioned this idea of giving meaning to different stakeholders that are important for the company, and you mentioned definitely employees, consumers. So maybe we can expand a little bit more the answers to that questions about what are the benefits for a company behind its CSR strategy. So do you have concrete or a very important element to put into place? I think Odile, you also mentioned the fact that it's totally connected to the products you are producing, the fact that you have to securing your raw materials, so it's to keep the company sustainable over time. So this is also another benefits that you mentioned. But what about employees? You are HR manager. Is it something really interesting and beneficial for your employees?
Yes, definitely. I think, most employees want to be in a company where they feel they are respected, and the company respects not only the employees, but respects all the stakeholders with which it interacts, because it builds trust. It's the basis of trust. And there's a minimum of trust, and the more trust there is between employees and the company, the better engagement you have, the better empowerment you have also, because if people feel trusted, they feel they can take initiatives, they feel they can go further, go the extra mile, and you get immediately benefits in terms of results. And we see very clearly that in our employee surveys, the fact of having engaged more and more our employees on a number of CSV subjects, in volunteering also in quite a lot of initiatives, we see the effect. It has an effect on the overall engagement of our employees. So this is one thing that is for sure. In terms also of employee branding, definitely Generation Y, Z, I mean, it's hard to follow those generation letters those days. For them, those questions of respect, of sustainability, of responsibility are essential for them to feel engaged with the company and to want to engage with the company. And we see that it's a key criteria for people to join the company. And every time we do sessions of recruitment assessments with students, that kind of question always comes back and comes on the table. But that will work only if it's congruent with the reality. And this notion of congruence, that it's authentic. It's not just greenwashing, as you put it, is the only way that it makes it work in terms of employee branding and attractiveness and engagement of our employees.
Do you see other important benefits, Jan?
Yes, I think maybe the best is to continue on some very, very practical examples. It happened that I was engaged with, close to where we are living here in Brussels, a person with 2 people in a garage. And they decided to help educate some of their clients with regard nitty-gritty technical issues, easily to fix. That doesn't oblige you to go always to the garage. And that cost, but he was creating, in French say, fidélité. And it was extremely well appreciated. And that garage, despite the big crisis that hit the brand of the cars he was having also in his garage, he continued to keep his clients, happy clients that got the tricks and that were also educated about more sustainable and secure driving to consume less petrol, which is also a benefit for the planet. That is a very concrete example for a small, medium enterprise, a small company. Another example is when you speak to people working in R&D in some companies. I take maybe a competitor of Nestlé, Danone, the R&D departments in France, working with their colleagues in Bangladesh about finding the new chemistry for products that needs to be extremely affordable for people in Bangladesh, especially children that have not the vitamins through the breakfast that you have to take, and so that you can keep being okay at school and perform, and then at school we know that it's important for future professional development. But if you see in the eyes what it is to do the impossible sometimes, and then it works and it's efficient with at least a minimum return on investment, but then you see not only the end results in terms of financial results and numbers and KPIs, but you see it also in the full body motivation, the body language. When I see examples of people around Antwerp, I take another local city next to Brussels, where there's a lot of diversity, so-called New Belgian Swiss, from ethnic backgrounds, is it from Asia, Africa, or Maghreb, and that have the shit jobs left out there. Well, I know a manager with a meeting company that is doing freight, hosting boats and sending boats to the other harbors across the world. He did something with his heart about how can I do something for these communities and these people that are having high unemployment in our areas, and he failed. He had a lot of resistance inside the company. Then he became strategic and said, how can I use the competences of these people that know languages? And my core business is to host boats with people on boats that speak all these languages, Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, whatever. He trained them, and he made these people the upfront first contact to be more efficient, to be more quick. And the reputation is, if you go to Antwerp for freight, go to that company, you will be better served, it will be quicker, and you can cut a half day of your trip, and you can be sooner in another harbor to do the rest of your job. So this is, when you look and speak to the people, what they say are the benefits. It's helping people, it's giving meaning, and it's helping efficiency. So that is clear benefits. Of course, there are full contradictions. What you do nice in the right hand can be sometimes contradicted in one organization in what you do in the left hand, and which are maybe not benefits. But that is coping with complexity and contradictions.
You touch another topic with your example, Sian. It's the topic of SMEs. So we receive also questions to ask, is CSR a topic only for big companies? I would say that at the beginning, probably yes, the term CSR was attached to big companies. But the answer is definitely no, and you gave some example. I think the definition of the European Commission that you gave at the beginning of this session is really clear. It's the responsibility for your impact on society, and that's not limited to big companies. It could involve also universities, small companies, any type of organizations, NGOs, and so on. And some of you already suggest in the discussion forum that it would be better not to talk about corporate social responsibility, but maybe only about responsibility, social responsibility, organizational responsibility. It's a matter of the term you use to discuss about those issues, but definitely the answer to this question is yes, CSR is also for smaller companies. The difference would be that maybe they do not use the term yet a lot. They practice CSR without putting the term CSR on their activities. That's often what we observe when we discuss with leaders of small companies. They say, oh yes, when I listen to what is CSR, probably, yeah, we practice CSR, we discuss with our stakeholders, we are in a continuous dialogue with them, we also take care of the impact on the environment. Would it be for economical reasons or for ethical reasons or both? So I think definitely the answer is yes, CSR is for SMEs, and you give example. I don't know if you want to add something on these elements about the CSR for SMEs.
Well, I think Odile might have some elements regarding how also large companies, but through their value chain and with their suppliers, can take up a number of fundamental challenges, societal challenges that alone is mission impossible, or your impact will be very limited. So the whole chain, including from the very small to the medium to the large company, that is where you expect today some stronger consistency in the engagement together. Is it about some human rights challenges or environmental challenges? With now the COP21 targets that we have been setting, or the Sustainable Development Goals targets that we have been setting there recently. It's a collective effort. But of course, each has to bring where he or she can be at its best. Is it now large or small? It doesn't make a difference, because at the end, it is all about how men and women are giving more efficiency and more creativity to their jobs, with regard also the perspective of having that better impact on society. So I don't make too much of that distinction. You might say that smaller, medium enterprises, family-driven business are closer to the realities. You don't have all these layers, and sometimes you don't have all the bureaucracy that you have in companies. So that it's more natural, and they don't speak the language of CSR or shared value or whatever you call it. It's about being close to your clients, being efficient, being friendly, taking care. People have families, have children, sometimes unemployed with difficulties, health problems, and they want to do something. Look at what is happening in Greece today. Look at these thousands of small companies, many of them going bankrupt, some are surviving, and despite the tremendous problems they have to face, still go for being open, being and going and continue to do business with more empathy. For some, the crisis is a full opportunity to rethink the purpose of their business, how they go with their consumers, and they revisit the business model that is more going towards a social entrepreneurial business model than a just traditional one.
I just want to react on what you mentioned about the value chain, because of course I don't think I'm well placed to discuss SMEs coming from a very large company. But it's true that we work with a value chain which is incredibly complex these days, and it's sometimes one of the reasons why we have trouble controlling some of the issues that we encounter. But what is very important is that the first response that companies tend to have when they're faced with an issue in their value chain is to say, okay, we're just going to eliminate the suppliers, big or small, but very often smaller, which are not conforming to the requirements in terms of social responsibility. And this is, to me, a short-term view, and it's actually creating more damage than it's helping. And really, one of the best responses that we can give is to work with those companies, and again, with the help of NGOs, of institutions, to help them find a way to do business in a more sustainable way. And this is really the best approach and the most sustainable one. The problem is that it takes a lot of time, and it's not happening like this, and it's very difficult to explain this in 140 words in a Twitter. It's something complex, it's something that takes time, trust that involves a lot of different people, and by just being reactive to the different issues that come on the table and saying, okay, we'll stop using this supplier, we'll test our suppliers for this and that, you're not finding the long-term solution to the problem. So really, this notion of smaller companies, whenever they interact with larger companies, is how can we work together along the value chain to make things better.
Thank you, Odile. So I saw a question some minutes ago from Numan also that maybe makes an interesting connection to the discussion we had now. It is asking how to get out from the status quo that is present in some countries or some companies. So his question was, how to bring down that status quo. I think it's connected to one video that we discussed together in the MOOC about CSR implementation. Where does it begin? Where is the beginning of the story? And in this video, we discussed that for some companies, it begins by a crisis. And you mentioned this, Jan, some times ago, saying that sometimes it's because you face criticism, problems that it makes you think about problems in the way you practice business. So for some companies, it begins with a crisis. For some other companies, it begins with some enlightened leaders that arrive in a position where they have the right to decide, the right to push the company in one direction. I have in mind some examples of companies in Belgium like Umicore that at a certain time have to change their business model. They were a classical, I would say, chemical company, and they want to change their business model to something more sustainable. And that's by bringing some enlightened people at the top of the company that makes the company goes in a totally different direction, more sustainable direction. So sometimes it's also due to some new leaders, new insight inside the company. Also look at the what we call the moral champion in the companies, the people who have already this idea that we can do things differently. And by bringing together multiple people with the same feeling and the same ideas, it could become also a way to move from the status quo perspective. And of course, the pressures of your stakeholders. If you listen to your stakeholders, if you listen to consumers, to your employees, to your suppliers or customers, depending on where you are in the supply chain, I'm sure that companies receive a lot of pressures to behave differently and more responsibly. So I would say it's to be open to the claims of your stakeholders that will also help the companies to move and to get out from the status quo. But that's not easy indeed, because people like their routines. Everybody says they don't like routine, but at the end of the day, they appreciate routine because it makes their life easier. They don't have to think always about new things. Do business as usual is much easier than to reinvent the way of doing business. But I think today it's a matter of survival. So that's the first ideas I would suggest on that, but maybe you have other idea how to get out from the status quo, Jan and Odile.
Well, thank you very much for the question, because you put the finger on a situation that we are all witnessing and of which we are all part of. We are part of the status quo. So what we have been experiencing over the years in working with enterprises is that you can start to break the walls of status quo and the silence sometimes within even organizations by some disruptive dialogues with people we would not even having been thinking about that they could be a partner of dialogue with companies. I see a number of CEOs engaging very interesting discussions with civil society or social entrepreneurs like Nobel Prize Mohamed Yunus from the Grameen Bank, and the way they look at the purpose of the enterprise and the business model and see how you can fully go beyond the status quo and really be creative. It's quite amazing what can result out of that. I can go and take you to visit some new business units that have been created. Is it in Colombia or even here in the north of France or in Poland, that has been generated through that smart combination of sometimes fire and water, of hard and soft. So that is one way, and we dare to challenge some board members and CEOs to directly get in contact with these people. Then what we also use very often, and I think it's very healthy, it's what I call the co-opetition, where we bring companies together to compete for a better, but sometimes to be efficient through a minimum of cooperation. Because are you trying to transform your purchase, your procurement status quo policy? Well, get people from different sectors of companies together and they all go through the pain of bringing step-by-step change in their procurement, and bring them together, and they like to do some peer benchmarks. And they like to give to others where they are better at and to take in return where they are less good at. So that creation of a zone of comfort where not all the fingers are being pointing to only the bad aspects of what the company is maybe experiences, but also create that good emulation. So civil society, you mentioned it, Valérie, is extremely important. When I see the role of some well-known NGOs like Greenpeace or WWF and others less known, but take Greenpeace, you might say, oh, they are very aggressive. But I know big brands that are saying, okay, let's face it, and let's see. That is interesting. We need to accept to be attacked. While at the same time, our engineers will work with the engineers of Greenpeace to fix the thousands and millions of fridges that have a negative impact on climate, for instance. The two together Well, that's quite a revolution.
I think, Jan, this is totally a situation that you faced in the past, and
well,
Nestlé. So maybe you can.
We face, yeah, it's interesting because there is this mixture with the NGOs of a relationship of creating tension, but also collaborating. And it happens at the same time, and sometimes it's difficult to accept, but you're right. The first thing is to accept that's part of the game. We had this with the palm oil issue. Greenpeace made an attack on Nestlé using the KitKat brand, saying that KitKat was made with palm oil coming from the plantation in Indonesia that were managed in, against the environment. Okay. What is really interesting is that we had been engaged actually with Greenpeace for several years, months or years, on how can we solve this issue and what can we do to get through this. It didn't prevent Greenpeace from attacking us. And they knew that we were going in the right direction and that we were trying to make things right. But for Greenpeace to use a worldwide, extremely well-known brand like KitKat to pass their message is, of course, very strong. They don't have to build a brand; they use the brand of KitKat. So, and all is fair in love and war. And in this case, it was like, okay, fair enough. We will continue to work with Greenpeace. We have some plans to eliminate non-sustainable palm oil from our supply chain. We continue with our plans. We're not going to accelerate them or to suddenly try to have a crazy crisis response. We just continue to maintain our message and we continue to collaborate. And so, yes, it's part of the way we do this, but if there's not this tension, we will not move. And so it is important. It's just, if we don't have stakeholders out there, NGOs that raise issues, sometimes we don't see them because, again, we're not necessarily specialists. And so we need those NGOs. We need to engage with them because they're bringing to the front issues that we're not necessarily aware of. Or if we're aware of them, we haven't really got around to how to tackle them. So yes, this tension is necessary.
And I think it's important to understand that if you really enter that dialogue and as a first entrance to an engagement, a collaboration with these stakeholders, it is also sometimes to get out civil society organizations out of their status quo.
Yes.
Because you cannot, well, I cannot accept that some of the NGOs are saying, I am saving the Declaration of Human Rights and flagging the child labor, but without putting dust on your shoes, meaning you must, of course, criticize, and that is, I think, welcome by everybody, including many companies that are willing to comply with the international norms and standards and principles. But what if you, for instance, stop a contract with a supplier that through an audit is discovered to have child labor? Let's say that you stop the contract. Does it mean that you're clean? Does it mean that the NGO has won the battle? The children, they will go to parallel markets in prostitution just because the source of the problem of poverty is that families get kids to come back with some coins in the evening. So where is it that the challenge is to get and the company and the NGO out of the status quo to co-elaborate solutions and to co-lobby sometimes local, regional authorities to see that this child labor can maybe be transformed into a curriculum with a dual learning system, with a certification that is being recognized at the regional, national level, and this is then becoming an education, and where everything is secured with regard to really child labor conditions that you cannot accept, of course, but where do you transform a situation towards a better and not just cut the arm because there is an injury and there you are without the arm? It's not a solution. But the status quo in civil society organization is also a tendency, because we're just human beings,
So the time is going, but I think we still have some questions to address, so I propose to continue for a few minutes. And one of them is connected to the authorities that you just mentioned, Jan. We received questions about how does a multinational, for instance, a multinational like Nestlé, manage the fact that regulations are different in different countries? Does it mean that you address the regulation country by country, or that you decide to follow the strongest one everywhere where you are active? Can you give us some tips about these questions, Odile?
Okay. So yeah, the first thing is to be compliant with the legal constraints and legal rules of the countries in which we operate. And it sounds obvious, but sometimes it's not so obvious. Laws are complex and sometimes they're contradictory. Yeah? So it's not such a simple thing to achieve. So it's already something that requires effort, that requires focus, that requires a lot of work. Then the question is, do we adapt to the norms of the lowest common denominator? No. We try to have some norms that we apply everywhere, okay? So it's not that we take the strongest, for instance, in terms of salary, I'm not going to take the salaries from Switzerland, which is probably, one of our highest paying countries in the world, and apply them all over the world. I mean, the business would go bankrupt tomorrow and 330,000 people would be without a job. So that of course doesn't make sense. But we have a number of initiatives in those areas. The one that I think is the most interesting is the living wage project. So what does this mean? It means that we have asked an external organization, and at the moment I don't remember its name, but I will give it to you because it could be interesting for your students, to assess what they would consider as a minimum living wage to live decently in each of the countries in which we operate, okay? And then all the HR managers from all over the world receive this, amount. It's basically an amount. So for Belgium, it was 21,000 euros per year, okay? And then we are looking, what is the lowest salary that we pay to our employee? And we check that we're above that living wage, okay? And the living wage can be way above the minimum wage. I mean, obviously in Belgium, it's not a problem. In Western Europe, we don't have issues, but in some countries, there's not even a minimum wage. So, this is something important. And in some countries, we did find out that we had a gap. We were not paying people at the level of living wage. So each market that is in that situation had to present a plan to close the gap within, I think, 3 years. Is the delay, 2 to 3 years, I think, is the delay that we have. And we need to do that without jeopardizing the competitiveness of our operations. So this is why also we need to take a bit of time, because we need to find some productivity gains that allow us to achieve this. So this is one example where we try to have norms that apply, regardless of the local legislation. There are a few others like this that I can mention. There's one about powdered milk, infant formula publicity and marketing, where we have a norm that applies everywhere in the world, regardless of the legislation. And it's much more stringent than what our competitors tend to apply.
Okay. And Jan, maybe you have experience also with a lot of multinationals. What are, according to you, is it the norm, the way Odile presented their reaction to take kind of common norms in the company to respect all over the world? Or, of course, I think we can quote examples of multinationals that also try to go where the legislation are the less strict for them and the most beneficial for them. What is your opinion on this issue?
I trust the civil society, governments, and the private sector and sector associations to come to a smart way of applying the highest average of norms. And I think the example you gave was really good. And I know that, for instance, some companies that were under attack because of salary issues, especially in developing countries, took the decisions to increase salaries, and you know the result was without the methodology that you have been explaining. And that is what I said at the beginning, you try, you fail, and then you improve. But in the past, it has been the case of some large companies and multinationals to increase salaries in a number of countries. And what was the impact? That a number of school teachers and local doctors leave the job and go earn more money in making t-shirts. Is that a big contribution? Is that a business impact on the community? No. So taking that approach is much more mature than just a quick reaction and say, well, look, since we make, of course, big benefits, let's increase quickly some of the salaries and we will get rid of the crisis of being attacked. So you need to be extremely smart. So I trust also this process of getting to the smart solutions.
What about now, if we continue on this topic of regulation, do you observe some trends also for the regulation to become stricter with respect to social or environmental issues? Could you give us some example of important regulations here?
Yes, well, I can only speak mostly about Europe, of course, but there is now quite a broad understanding among leading enterprises on CSR, civil society organizations, and the European Coalition of Corporate Justice, having the largest NGOs like Friends of the Earth, Amnesty International and others, having also the trade unions, having the European Commission and the European Parliament and the Council of Member States. They agree that some of these critical issues we are discussing needs a smart mix with a smart balance of some legislation that can support companies towards a better compliance with a number of international norms, while also having some policies that are more of an incentive to support innovation. Let's take a couple of examples. The EU adopted very recently a European package on the circular economy. And that is a smart mix of how policymakers are engaging with the business industry to look at how to accelerate the pace towards changing the patterns of making products in a more circular way, but also how to then work in incentivizing consumers to consume in a more circular way. And in the meantime, there are some top-down regulations that are necessary with regards to more technical, environmental-related issues, for instance. So circular economy is a package of a smart mixed approach of pushing for better compliance while also incentivizing the innovation. Another example is on conflict minerals. So if you would have a dialogue with your mobile, not to speak to somebody, but just to speak with your mobile, you will discover that all our mobiles and computers are still having a number of minerals that are coming, that are sourced from conflict zones, almost no zones. So how do we go about that? So the European Parliament has been voting a regulation that still needs to be co-decided with the Council of 28 member states. And then the question is, are we going through regulation to ask more and more of auditing processes, and is it that we believe that through that we are touching the roots of the problems, which are more asking for capacity building locally to create economic growth and not just to accept the monopoly of just one industry that are in the hands of military troops. So there is a debate, and you will have companies and front runners, leading companies that are seeing the value of regulation, while maybe the average is saying, oh, we need not all that red tape. But there's discussions, there is regulation debates with companies, with trade unions, with civil society. But that is one that I would advise people to watch, as in 2016 there might be some outcomes regarding the conflict minerals. Tax is the next big issue. Where do companies pay their tax? And there we maybe get at the very heart of corporate responsibility. Where do you make your benefits? Where do you pay your tax? And tax is about participating collectively to a local growth social market. With regards securing minimum goods, mobility conditions, care, school, culture, and so on. So that's the next big debate, and the EU and the European Commission within the EU institutions just adopted also a number of packages where clearly you have a smart mix of initiatives to be taken, including some regulatory ones. And there you see a strong push from the G20, from the OECD, from the EU and other bodies, that this is going to be the next big chapter of making companies more transparent. Recently, the EU adopted a regulation, a European directive on non-financial information. I would have called it extra-financial. I think the non is too negative. But there will be, by the end of December 2016, this year, a transposition of that European regulation in 28 member states, which means that large companies today, but also many others that will have the indirect impact of that regulation, so large companies will start to prepare their sustainability, CSR, or whatever you call it, ESG report, according to a European norm that is asking to comply or explain, but to comply with telling, do you have a policy? Do you have practices? Do you have a risk management on employment, environment, human rights, bribery, corruption, and on diversity at board level? That is going to be effective as from 2017, since companies will have to prepare themselves so that the reports in 2018 of these companies are compatible, are complying with the expectations of the EU. And the other side of the coin of that regulation is that the EU is preparing, and the Parliament already took a first step in voting a regulation that the member states have to co-decide again, but for the shareholders' rights, that is to make it mandatory for investors to also be transparent about the criteria and process on how they make capital allocations, how do they decide about their investments. And there they will be requested to show how they're going to make use of the non-financial information of companies to justify some of the decisions. So there's a trend out there to use transparency as a means, not as an end, to have nice documents with nice pictures that nobody reads, by the way, but it's really to use transparency as a means towards more integrated sustainability in management, in the integrated performance of companies, with the support of the investors, with more patient capitalist investors, if I can use that word.
Okay, thank you, Jan, for all those interesting examples. I think we will somewhat conclude now with two main questions that I want to ask both of you. I think the first one is not a question that comes from the workers, I will call them, but it's a question that I think they should all have is, what are, according to you, the skills that managers, leaders today have to develop when we think about all those topics of circular economy, CSR, CSV strategy? What are examples of skills that would be interesting to develop? I think it should interest our participants since they are there to develop their skills. So what kind of skills do they have to develop? And I think in the continuity of that question, I would ask you to talk about maybe any type of topics that you would love to talk about today and we did not cover yet. Maybe Odile, you can answer that?
So you're talking about the skills of all people involved, not exactly. The CSR specialists.
No,
okay, all right. Well, dealing with complexity and dealing with change becomes probably the the biggest issue that people in corporations, but in all kinds of human organizations have to deal with. The world is getting more complex, it's changing faster, and how do we deal with this? How do we remain calm in those circumstances? How do we stay focused? How do we avoid just piling pressure on pressure? Becomes really essential. And so it's this notion of, calm under pressure, an ability to embrace the complexity, and from this complexity to find solutions is probably what is the most important. So, yeah, it's a very broad answer.
No, but that's an important skill that is not easy to train with students in general, because students have the habit to have an easy answer to a complex situation, or to have a model that they can develop. We see the problem of financial models sometimes go, so just apply models in all situations, while I think it's not possible anymore in the context we know.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and maybe also to give it for the conclusions. I will have two answers, maybe complementary. I think that from managers or from leaders of companies, what we would expect, and it's not coming from me, it's Professor Philippe de Boot, who's saying that the managers of tomorrow need strong skills with regard to entrepreneurship, leadership, and statesmanship. Meaning, don't think your business in isolation of a world that is confronted with so much change, and the pace of change is something that you touched on, Odile, and requiring the skills you have been mentioning. A license to have a lot of empathy, a license to dare. The best ever comment I received when, with Valérie, we have been setting up a number of courses here at the Louvain University, is that we were very borderline. I think we really have to be borderline. Business as usual, status quo, as you have mentioned in the questions, is not something that we can live with anymore. And that means, for instance, also, how do you prepare the next generations? They will have to cope with much more challenges than the ones, the generations of today. So there we need a lot of empathy also of managers and people working in business to go about what I would call the education revolution, where the future, at least in Europe where I live, but I can imagine also in other regions, if we want to cope with the circular economy, the Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, name it, how do you prepare the young generations to take up the jobs that can make that a reality, and that can cope with the social and environmental impacts of this huge transformation of our societies? So there is, I would say, a core responsibility for companies and at board level to engage in partnership with schools, including primary schools, secondary schools, dual systems, professional teaching, vocational training, and not just having the nice relationship with fancy brands of big universities. The schools in your communities, and support the teachers. Do you know that in my country, Belgium, 40% of teachers in primary, secondary schools leave the job after 5 years? There's no prestige to be a teacher in my country. Is that the way we prepare our young generation to have the skills that we're discussing here? No, bullshit, that's not happening. So how do we, as companies, invest in education, not to take over the job, in the contrary, but to support teachers, to contextualize science, technology, mathematics, but also teach entrepreneurship skills, teach transversal skills, attitudes, values. That is critical. The soft and the hard skills we need for the jobs of tomorrow. So we need a multi-tiered approach, but let's make sure that we are quick in supporting also the future generations to have the right skills and attitudes.
Thank you for these ideas of the skills. And is there a topic, Odile, that we did not touch yet that you think is interesting to add before the conclusion?
Well, maybe I'm going to speak as an HR manager here, because I'm addressing a number of students. I think from the demographics that I've seen, you're around your late 20s, early 30s in majority. You either have entered the professional world or you're going to. And the more I interact with students, with young people, the more I see them interested in CSR and in getting a job in CSR. And what I want to say, I mean, I've mentioned the numbers for our company, 330,000 people, and maybe in total, okay, if I add everybody together, 100 people working on CSR. So first, I mean, as a career option, yes, it's a great possibility and it's very fascinating, but there are not that many jobs there. But more importantly, as I said, it needs to be a way of doing business. So enter the professional world, develop value, create, develop business, but do it with having this in mind. And this is where you will have the biggest impact. And this is where you will be helping the most society. So it's really to go into standard business roles, be it marketing, be it sourcing, be it engineering, be it HR, do it, but keeping in mind all you're learning in this course, that CSR is a way of doing business.
Thank you, Odile. Jan, questions that we did not address yet that you want to touch now?
One, and then maybe one call. An issue that I look at and that I can follow on a daily basis through news is this statistics we get about numbers of employees and workers not happy at work, demotivated, getting into depression, burnout. The statistics are really increasing, almost months after months. While in our countries we are voting legislations to make people work longer. So there is something happening out there. And I think that the function of HR is a dream, while also sometimes a nightmare, I think, when you have to deal with these issues. So there is really something that we have to look at in our beautiful, old and new Europe. It's the well-being at work, mental health, and the impact of not taking that seriously on board is going to have direct impact, not only on the quality of lives of people and their families, but also on the productivity and bottom line of companies. You cannot be creative if you are not well in your mind and in your body. So that is really an issue, I think, that is becoming also very strategic in Europe. And then one call is choose to be, if you enter a business, or do you enter a civil society organization, do you enter government or whatever organization, but choose to be what we call sometimes at Louvain a manager Jedi. And the Jedis can become values, by the way. Be careful, you're not. That you need to choose that for almost every day. But the Jedi is strong, not because it has more power and muscles or whatever. It is working constantly on itself, trying to have a deep dive or using its intellectual capital, its emotional capital, and its spiritual capital. If you could find the right balance in sourcing yourself in these three assets you have, and we all have it, then you can care more about yourself, you can care more about others, you can be more efficient and more productive and more happy.
So I think it's a nice way to conclude this discussion. So of course we can continue hours and hours of discussion on this topic, but I think we will stop this live session just now. We already take some more time than what was the schedule. But it doesn't mean that we stop the discussion, because I really invite you to continue the discussion by continue asking questions on the discussion forum where Barbara and I, among other participants to the MOOC, are really ready to answer and to give some further comments on your post. So do not hesitate to continue the discussion on the forum. We will definitely put this video also available for all the people that cannot join us now, so you can see it and maybe raise some new questions. You should also know that today we launched the third module, so I really welcome you to look at the new materials where we enter in the topic of CSR communication this week. What else? I think I should say that I will put some complementary information attached to these videos, some topics that we mentioned, one and the other, for which if you want to go for more information, you can also go and see. I will also try to discover what happens to Jacques Spelkens. I'm sorry if some of you want to meet him today. He wasn't able to join, so I will give you some news about him. I hope he's going well. And before we finish, I want to thank also Barbara that was there to ensure that everything was going well on the technical side, and Françoise that also helped us to design this Hangout session. And something that I did not say already on the MOOC is that we will probably have a second Hangout session. I said probably, but we will have a second Hangout session. It will be, I think, I'm not wrong, I'm saying it's April 15, so it will be on a Friday. So I hope you will be able to join us, and I will give you more information on the platform very soon. So thank you all for your attention, and see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.